November 1944. The Philippine Sea is silent tonight, silent in a way that feels unnatural, as if the ocean itself is holding its breath. Far beneath the waves, a long black silhouette glides through the dark water. The Japanese submarine I-47 moves slowly, deliberately, every metal plate groaning under pressure. Inside, the crew speaks in low whispers, barely audible over the steady hum of engines. They are anxious, exhausted, but determined. Deep in the belly of the vessel, a single man prepares for a mission from which he will not return. His cockpit is barely larger than a coffin. The walls curve around him, cold steel brushing against his shoulders. Dim red lights glow above his head, casting long shadows that stretch across the cramped space. Every sound is amplified. His slow breaths, the soft clicking of the gyroscope, the distant vibration of the submarine's propellers. He wipes a layer of condensation from a metal panel, then adjusts a valve with steady hands trained through endless rehearsals. But tonight, something is different. Beside his knee rests a small ceramic urn. He places his hand on it gently, the way someone might touch a sleeping child. A promise rests inside that container, a promise he intends to keep. The submarine captain's voice crackles through the wire, phone connected to his cockpit. Targets ahead, approximately 4.5 miles. The pilot closes his eyes for a brief second, breathing out slowly. His reply is calm, almost serene. Understood. Outside the hull, crewmen move quickly, locking mechanisms, unlatching clamps, preparing the deadly cargo for release. The submarine rises slightly, positioning itself for the attack. Inside the cramped chamber, the pilot tightens his straps, grips the controls, and bows his head one last time toward the urn. Then, a metallic thud, a jolt through the frame. The Kaiten detaches, water rushes across the hull, and the small craft sinks into the dark void, drifting away from the submarine like a shadow cutting through the deep. And in the very moment his journey truly begins, time stops. To understand why this man is alone in a steel torpedo, heading toward the largest American anchorage in the Pacific, we must go back to where his story really began, June 1942. Tokyo's summer air hangs thick and heavy, but inside the Naval Command building, a colder weight settles over every man in uniform. Behind closed doors, far from the patriotic newspapers and triumphant broadcasts, Japan's highest-ranking officers sit in stunned silence. A runner enters the room, bows deeply, and places a message on the table. The words inside confirm what many of them already feared. Midway wasn't a setback. It was a catastrophe. 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, all gone, thousands of men lost. Most devastating of all, Japan's elite aviators, the irreplaceable core of its naval power, were wiped out. Outside these walls, the public is told it was a draw. Inside, the truth spreads like a slow, suffocating fog. For the first time since the war began, officers whisper what they were never allowed to think aloud. We cannot replace what we have lost. Across the Pacific, American industry is roaring awake. Factories in Detroit, Chicago, Seattle, and Los Angeles work day and night, producing ships, planes, and ammunition at a speed the Japanese Empire simply cannot match. Every month, new carriers slide into the ocean. Every month, thousands of fresh pilots train, refuel, and join the fight. Japan's Navy, once the pride of the empire, feels the ground shifting under its feet. Inside strategy rooms, charts show an unthinkable comparison. American production climbing like a steep cliff. Japanese production plateauing, then falling. Officers stare at the numbers, at each other, at the floor. They know a conventional victory is gone, and when logic fails, desperation answers. Quietly at first, then with growing boldness, wild proposals begin circulating in the naval research departments. Ships driven by men on suicide missions. Aircraft redesigned to be flown only once. Submarines turned into one-way weapons. Pilots trained not to come home. Ideas that would never be spoken during the Empire's confident years suddenly become the only ideas anyone wants to hear. Because deep down, every officer understands something terrible. If they cannot outbuild America, they must out-sacrifice them. And in the shadows of this desperation, the concept of a man becoming a weapon, body, mind, and soul, begins to take root. Long before he found himself sealed inside a steel torpedo, our pilot had lived a very different life. He was once a young naval aviator, energetic, disciplined, proud to serve the Empire. And beside him, always within arm's reach, was his closest friend. The two trained together, laughed together, argued like brothers, and shared the same belief that Japan's navy was unstoppable. But the war changed faster than they expected. By late 1943, both men found themselves reassigned to submarine-related operations, a move neither had anticipated. The great carriers were gone, pilot shortages were severe, and the Navy was desperately searching for ways to use the remaining skilled men. Submarine warfare should have offered a new purpose. Instead, it offered frustration. Inside briefing rooms, they watched grainy reports showing mission after mission ending the same way. Torpedoes that missed equipment, that malfunctioned submarines detected instantly by American sonar crews dying without inflicting a single blow. After one particularly grim meeting, the two friends walked along the docks in silence. The salty wind blowing across abandoned midget submarines lined up like rusted ghosts. "This is pointless," his friend muttered. "We send men out, and they die before firing a single shot." The pilot nodded, jaw tight. "We ask them to sacrifice everything, and for what? A mission with zero chance of success?" His friend stopped walking. He looked at one of the small submarines, dented from training impacts, paint peeling, more coffin than vessel. Then he said something that would change both of their lives. "If I'm going to die anyway, I'd rather take one of their ships with me." The pilot stared at him. It was an awful thought, unthinkable even. Yet, in that moment, with desperation hanging over Japan like a permanent dusk, the idea didn't feel insane. It felt inevitable. "What if a man guided the torpedo himself?" the pilot whispered. His friend turned to him slowly. Both felt the weight of that sentence pierce the air between them. Guided by loyalty, fueled by honor, born from fear of failure. Two men standing under a dim dockside lamp, staring at a broken submarine. And together, in that quiet moment, they conceived the most terrible idea of the war. A weapon that required the pilot to die for it to succeed. What began as a whispered idea on a quiet dock quickly grew into an obsession. The two friends returned to their barracks that night, unable to sleep. Instead, they cleared a small table, lit a dim oil lamp, and began sketching. Rough outlines at first. A longer, faster torpedo, a cramped cockpit, a primitive periscope, a warhead large enough to tear open a battleship. Hour after hour, pencil strokes filled the page. How large? As large as we can make it. And the pilot chamber? As small as necessary. By dawn, their sketches looked less like imagination and more like blueprints, They presented their concept to naval engineers a week later. The officers examined the drawings with long, uneasy stares. A torpedo piloted by a man? A weapon designed never to return? The answer was an immediate and decisive no. Not because the design was flawed, but because the idea was too sincere, too horrifyingly sincere. But the two refused to let the dream die. They returned with a revised plan, rejected again and again. So they made a final, desperate gesture, one only men who fully expected to die would consider. They rewrote the proposal in their own blood, signing their names beneath a vow that the Empire's survival mattered more than their lives. The gesture shocked the reviewing officers. They still hated the idea. But in a navy starved for options, sincerity carried power. The proposal was approved with one condition: the pilot must have a way to escape. The friends tried. They sketched hatches, flotation systems, pressure valves, but every solution failed testing. Some jammed, others buckled under ocean pressure. Most were simply too slow. Eventually, the escape system was quietly abandoned. No one mentioned it again. What emerged from months of engineering was Japan's most tragic creation, the Kaiten, Return to Heaven. Final specifications: 14.7 meters long, 1 meter wide, over 8 tons in weight, one tiny periscope, basic gyroscope for navigation, a single, almost claustrophobic cockpit, and at the front, a warhead carrying 1.25 tons of explosive power. Beautiful in design, terrifying in purpose, a weapon that needed a pilot and promised him no way home. When news of the Kaiten project spread through the naval bases, something unexpected happened. Thousands of young men volunteered. Some were pilots with no planes left to fly. Some were cadets who had never seen real combat. Some simply believed that dying with purpose was better than living without contributing. But the Navy selected only a few hundred, men with discipline, calm nerves, and the ability to operate in a space no larger than a coffin. Training began on the remote island of Otsushima. The conditions were brutal. Each man was lowered into a practice kaiten and locked inside for hours at a time. The moment the hatch sealed, the world shrank to a steel cylinder, barely wide enough to move his elbows. Condensation dripped from the ceiling. The air grew hot and stale. Every breath tasted of metal. Some trainees panicked within minutes. Others fainted from lack of airflow. A few begged to be released. Those who endured moved on to the next trial, submerged navigation. Inside the sealed chamber, they practiced steering with primitive valves, controlling buoyancy, reading dials in almost total darkness, conserving oxygen, managing fear when the hull groaned under pressure. Mechanical failures were common. Engines stalled, valves jammed, batteries overheated. Each malfunction felt personal, like the machine was testing the pilot's resolve. But for our protagonist and his closest friend, this wasn't just training. It was preparation for the promise they made. To die together, to strike together, to fulfill the mission they themselves had helped create. Then came the day that changed everything. During a routine training dive, his friend insisted on piloting an early Kaiten in rough weather. The seas were unpredictable, visibility terrible. The protagonist begged him to postpone the test. His friend smiled, shook his head and said, "If conditions will be hard in combat, they should be hard in training." He sealed himself inside and dove beneath the waves. Minutes passed, then an hour, then more. The support boats circled, searching for bubbles or signals, but the ocean remained silent. Deep below, unseen in the murky currents, the Kaiten had gone too deep. Its controls jammed. The craft sank uncontrollably. Inside, his friend fought the valves, fought the pressure, fought for breath, until the sea crushed the chamber around him. By the time divers found the wreck, he was gone. The protagonist held the final letter his friend had written. A report blaming no one, ending with a quiet farewell. Grief carved something permanent inside him. Survivor's guilt, a vow renewed, a promise now carried alone. And when the first combat mission was announced, he did not hesitate. He volunteered to go in his friend's place. By late 1944, Japan's situation had grown desperate. American forces were sweeping across the Pacific with overwhelming strength, taking island after island. Supply lines were collapsing, fuel was scarce. Entire fleets lay at the bottom of the sea. In this chaos, Japanese high command searched for one opportunity, just one, to slow the American advance. They found it on a map. Ulithi Atoll, a quiet cluster of islands, hiding one of the largest American naval anchorages in the world. Dozens of ships moored close together. Tankers, repair vessels, supply ships, all resting in what the Americans considered a safe harbor. To Japanese planners, it was a gift. A single successful strike here could ignite chaos, disrupt logistics, and send a message. Japan could still strike back. The decision was made. A Kaiten attack would be launched. 3 large submarines, I-36, I-47, and I-48, were assigned to carry the first wave of manned torpedoes. Each submarine held multiple Kaitens strapped to its deck, deadly shadows waiting like silent beasts. Before departure, the selected pilots were summoned to a ceremonial gathering. Inside a modest hall, lit by lanterns, the atmosphere was strangely calm. The air smelled of incense and polished wood. Officers gave speeches about honor, duty, and the unbroken spirit of the empire. Sake cups were passed around. The men bowed deeply, acknowledging their fate with quiet dignity. Each pilot received a sword, a final symbol of warrior status. They wrote farewell poems, folded with steady hands, as tradition demanded. Some men tried to joke, to ease the tension. Others simply stared at the floor, lost in thought. Our protagonist stood apart, holding a small cloth-wrapped urn. Inside were the ashes of his closest friend, the man who should have been here with him. He whispered, "We go together, just as we promised." When dawn came, the 3 submarines slipped away from the coast, crews lining the decks in solemn silence. Families were not notified. There were no public goodbyes. Only the quiet acceptance that none of these pilots would ever return. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the submarines disappeared into the deep Pacific, carrying with them a weapon born from desperation, and one man determined to honor a fallen friend by seeing their dream and their sacrifice through to the end. The story returns to where we left him. Inside a steel tube sinking into the endless dark. The moment the Kaiten crewmen signal readiness, he crawls into the cockpit, careful not to bump the small urn secured beside his seat. The space feels even tighter than he remembered. His shoulders brush the curved walls. His knees are pulled so close to his chest he can barely shift his weight. The smell of machine oil hangs thick in the air. Behind him, the submarine crew gathers in a narrow passageway. None speak, none need to. Their faces say everything: respect, sorrow, fear, pride. Men who will live, saluting the man who will not. A senior officer leans in and grips his arm firmly. "Your courage will guide us," he whispers. The pilot bows his head. Then he reaches into the small compartment beside him and touches the urn gently with his fingertips. "We're ready," he murmurs. "Let's finish what we started." The crew closes the hatch. The circular door swings shut with a heavy metallic thud. He hears the locking wheel spin. 1 click, 2 clicks, 3, and then silence. The world outside this thin metal shell is gone. No voices, no sunlight, only the slow pulse of the ocean pressing in from every direction. He adjusts the straps across his chest, checks each valve, rests his hands on the controls. His heartbeat is loud in his ears, matching the rhythm of the faint engine vibrations. Through the wire phone mounted to his left, the submarine captain speaks one last time. "Kaiten number 1, releasing in 10 seconds. May your strike bring honor to Japan." The pilot closes his eyes, letting the finality of those words settle over him. The clamps unlatch. The cables fall away. A sudden jolt rocks the cockpit as the Kaiten breaks free from the submarine's hull. He is no longer part of the I-47. He is alone. A single man guiding a massive warhead through a black underwater world. He adjusts the rudder. The craft obeys, tilting deeper into the abyss. Only the soft hum of the motor keeps him company. The slow, tense journey toward the American fleet has truly begun. The Kaiten's nose cuts through the black water like a blade. Inside the cockpit, the pilot steadies his breathing, listening to the faint electric whine of the motor. His gauges flicker. Depth, heading, battery, all stable, for now. But he is not alone down here. 3 other Kaitens were released alongside him, 4 shadows racing silently toward the largest American anchorage in the Pacific. At least, that was the plan. Within minutes, the ocean reminds all of them how unforgiving it can be. Ahead, and slightly to the left, a dull metallic thud shakes the water. Another Kaiten has hit a sandbank. The pilot hears it through the hull. A deep, distant boom rolling through the sea like thunder. His grip tightens instinctively on the controls. Far above, American sailors standing on the decks of their anchored ships stop mid-sentence. Did you hear that? But the ocean is too dark, too empty, too quiet. They see nothing. Back underwater, the situation grows worse. On his right, the faint vibration of a second Kaiten suddenly shifts. Its engine coughs, sputters, then falls silent. The craft has been caught in a tangle of underwater nets. Defenses laid down to stop torpedoes. The pilot inside struggles, throttling the engine, trying to break free. The screeching metal echoes through the water. Above him, a lookout finally spots a thin periscope mast cutting across the surface. Contact! Possible sub! Alarms erupt across the anchorage. Searchlights sweep the waves. Destroyers sound battle stations. Depth charge crews sprint into position. And then, a blast so violent it lights the water from below. A depth charge detonates near the trapped Kaiten. The net jerks once, twice. Then the tiny submarine is torn apart, a cloud of debris and oil rising to the surface. Our pilot feels the shockwave slam into his hull. The cockpit rattles. Tools jump from their brackets. His ears ring. He grips the controls until his knuckles ache. If he surfaces now, he dies. If he hesitates, the mission fails. He makes his choice. He lowers his periscope fully and dives into shallower water, dangerously shallow. The Kaiten scrapes the seabed. Sand billows upward, clouding everything. He is effectively blind, navigating by instinct and by the faint, rhythmic clicking of his gyroscope. Minutes drag by like hours. At last, the depth rises enough for him to risk it. He slowly raises the periscope. Just a few centimeters. Just enough to see. And there, in the distance, faint silhouettes against a moonlit horizon, He sees them, rows of American ships, tankers, transports, warships, sitting still, unaware, vulnerable. He exhales, resetting his bearings with shaking hands. The moment he has trained for, the moment his friend died preparing for, has finally arrived. He adjusts the valves one last time. The Kaiten steadies, then begins to accelerate. Slow at first, then faster still. The electric motor hums beneath him, vibrating through the steel walls. Depth gauge rising, heading needle locked onto the target he glimpsed moments earlier. He leans forward, gripping the controls. Full speed, he whispers. The Kaiten answers. Water rushes violently along the hull, turning the small craft from a drifting shadow into a living projectile. 20 knots, 25, 30, the fastest manned underwater weapon ever created, now aimed straight at the American fleet. Inside the cockpit, something strange happens. The sound begins to fade. The engine's growl becomes distant. The hull's vibrations soften. Even his own heartbeat feels muted, as if drifting away. The world narrows to memories. A dim dock, two young pilots sketching a terrible idea. A training bay, laughter echoing between steel walls. The final letter written by a dying friend at the bottom of the sea. A promise made beside a small urn. We started this together. We finish it together. Flashbacks flicker like light, glancing off waves. Come on, my beauty. Don't go, the weather is too rough. If I'm to die, I want to take one ship with me. Then, silence. He opens his eyes. Through the periscope's tiny glass circle, the shape ahead becomes clear. Immense, motionless, perfectly illuminated by moonlight. A fleet oiler. A giant tanker loaded with fuel. The beating heart of Ulithi's Anchorage. USS Mississauga. He steers slightly left, corrects the angle, and lines up the bow directly with the ship's center. The distance closes rapidly. 600 meters, 400, 200. He touches the urn beside him. We made it. My friend. Inside the American ship, a sailor leaning on a rail suddenly notices a ripple in the water. Hey, what's the... He never finishes the sentence. Impact. A shock slams through the Kaiten. Then the ocean erupts. A colossal explosion tears the tanker's side open, blasting flames skyward like a volcanic eruption. Fuel tanks rupture instantly, sending towers of fire roaring into the night. The sea itself burns, orange, red, blistering white. Men dive into the water, screaming as secondary blasts rip through the ship. Fuel barrels explode like thunder as the oiler splits, bends, then begins to collapse in on itself. The night sky glows for miles. Aboard I-47, far beneath the surface, the crew sees a distant flash, then another, and another. They believe wrongly that all four Kaitens hit their marks, but in reality, only one reached its target, only one pilot fulfilled his mission, only one kept his promise. The blast consumes everything, and within minutes, the USS Mississauga begins to sink, taking more than 60 American sailors with it. A single man, in a steel torpedo, had set the sea on fire, and the price of that moment was paid. On both sides, news of the explosion at Ulithi traveled quickly. When the I-47's crew reported back to headquarters, they spoke with confidence, born from what they believed they saw. Multiple flashes, multiple secondary blasts, multiple impacts. Japanese commanders, desperate for good news, accepted the report eagerly. They wrote messages of victory. They praised the courage of the pilots. They described the mission as a breakthrough, proof that the Kaiten program could turn the tide of the war. The truth was harsher. Only one Kaiten hit its target. Only one ship was sunk. But in Tokyo, the official story grew larger with each retelling. And so, propelled by exaggerated success, the Navy launched more Kaiten missions, many more. The results were devastating. One after another, Kaitens were released and never heard from again. Some malfunctioned moments after launch. Others were destroyed by depth charges before reaching a target. A few simply vanished into the ocean, their fates unknown. By the end of the war, over 100 young men had died inside these cramped steel coffins. In total, Kaiten sank only a handful of ships. American casualties from all Kaiten attacks combined numbered less than 200. The weapon that was supposed to change everything changed almost nothing, except the men who entered them. For families across Japan, the Kaiten became a symbol of tragic devotion. Young pilots sacrificing themselves for missions that statistics said they would never survive. For American sailors, the attacks were sudden, terrifying, and deeply personal. But for history, the Kaiten sits in a quiet space between bravery and despair. Today, on the island of Otsushima, the old training grounds still remain. The narrow tunnels, the weathered docks, and the reconstructed Kaiten chambers stand as a solemn reminder of the men who climbed inside these steel tubes and never came back. Visitors walk through the Kaiten Memorial Museum in silence, reading the farewell letters, looking at photographs of smiling young pilots, men who believed their sacrifice might save their country. In the end, the legacy of that single fireball at Ulithi isn't victory. It is a story of desperation, a story of loyalty, a story of a forgotten generation who gave everything in a war that had already been lost.